Okay, we are live. Welcome everyone to another Infinite Space Bazaar workshop. We got in the house Ekram Ahmed. He's the head of marketing and PR at Celestia Labs. For today, Ekram's going to go over marketing and positioning your project for the hackathon, which can come really valuable when you want to talk more about your project. How do you want to present it to your audience, to your users, to other developers? And just a reminder before we get started, the Infinite Space Bazaar Hackathon is a 45-day hackathon, starts April 2nd last week, and it ends May 17th. And there's a lot of different content, a lot of tracks, 100K in prize by the main track, and more than that in partner bounties. So be sure to check it out. And yeah, I'm gonna hand it off to Ekram. Ekram, how you doing? Feel free to introduce yourself, and we can just jump right into it.
Thanks, guys. I'm doing well. Hey, everyone. Really excited to be here. Yaz, thanks for having me. And today I want to talk about brand positioning, marketing, and communications. And let's get started. First of all, who am I? I am a positioning strategist, and most of my work has been done in Web 2. I spent about a decade in the Bay Area. And early on in my career, I was a journalist, covered the latest news in startups, technology, angel venture capital. And then I met a woman who launched the Mac with Steve Jobs. And by the time I met her, she was positioning companies. And really, I just apprenticed for her for a number of years and learned a lot of my positioning game from her. And so a lot of what you see today is actually like inspired by the Apple brand and like just like the early work and thinking behind that. And so that woman is Andy Cunningham, and you can see her depicted there, and that's me. And so it's a blast from the past, but I do want to give a huge shout out to my mentor, Andy, and for all the inspiration throughout my career. So anyways, Andy would always talk about this quote, and it's a quote from Steve Jobs. The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is to come. And you really recognize the power of this when you get into crypto and Web3. Like, narrative is just orders of magnitude more powerful in crypto and compared to anything I've ever seen in my Web 2 years. And I think it could be said that, like, in crypto, narrative market fit is often found before even product market fit. And sometimes you can just launch this narrative that really organizes the community much sooner than even the product itself. So anyways, starting off with a quote here. And the next thing I'd like to do is talk about the difference between positioning and branding. So you may be just done with where you may be. You may be just done with hacking something, or maybe you've actually refined a product and you're looking at positioning and marketing it. The first real conceptual thing that you got to understand, I think, is that there is a real difference between branding and positioning. Like, they're two different techniques and they come in order. And my point of view is that you need to position first before you build a brand. And another way to think about it is that positioning is rational and branding is emotional. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that our brains are left and right brain. Going back to myself, a lot of my undergraduate work was in biological sciences. And I didn't really learn a lot, but one of the few things that I picked up in those years was that we as human beings were emotionally charged. We think in emotions, like, first and foremost. We feel things. This is why we get into relationships that often don't make sense. This is why we may impulsively buy something like a Rolex and then just sort of be like, what did I just do? And there's just this predisposition of our brains towards emotion. Now, the challenge is when it doesn't make rational sense. We like go into this cognitive dissonance. And I think when you have this marriage of left and right brain, and you as a brand communicate on both sides, you can achieve like this yin and yang of positioning and branding. And that's that's one of the most important things to think about this entire thing. You can't really build a brand if you don't position first. You can't really have a formidable position if the brand isn't really there. It's truly a yin and yang. It's like this marriage between the two. And I always like to start with positioning, and there's a reason for that. And we'll get into it. As you think about your brand position, there are 4 questions that I think you should focus on. What is it? Why does it matter? Why my project? Why now? The first one is very simple, but it's very challenging to actually pin it down. But you need sort of like the noun, like what is this thing at the end of the day? Let's just say media writes about it, a reporter, they're going to strip all the emotional, the marketing jargon out, and they're going to put an answer to number 1. What is it that you most want to see that reporter do? Why does it matter is the value proposition. People don't buy a plane ticket, they buy a destination. When someone makes a choice for your product, what are they actually getting? And I constantly like to ask the question, so what? So what? So what? All the way to the point where you finally get to the final distillation of the value. The third one is around competition. Why my project and not something else? Not a competitor, a substitution. And I think it's famously written that positioning solves what's known as the tyranny of choice. And so in a world where there's many choices or a number of choices, why your project, why your product and not something else? That's the real sort of compelling argument that we have to make. And then lastly, number 4 is another thing that positioning has to solve for, which is why now? Like why is now special? What trends and forces are at play in the market here that makes it the right time for this to be adopted, for this to be chosen? Why not wait? Why was last year not the right fit? Why now? And whether you like it or not, the act of positioning happens. A competitor can slander you. A reporter can completely engineer a narrative over you. In this world, if you do not position, you will be positioned. If you don't choose a category, you will be assigned a category. It's very important for you to control the narrative of the brand itself. And that's why the act of positioning should not be left up to anyone else. Before you launch, you want to figure out your strategic position, or else you will be positioned. And going back to those questions beforehand, those answers, if you don't like be explicit about it, others will just make up those answers for you. And then once a narrative sort of takes root against you, then you have an even bigger problem where you have to dismantle that narrative, unroot that narrative, and then you're fighting with existing mind share. And that's always like a bigger challenge. If there's anything that I've kind of learned about marketing over the years is that marketing can be synonymous with mind share. What is the strategic mind share that you want to build around it? And the thing about this is that it can't be bullshit. It can't be marketing fluff. Anything too right brain for your positioning won't actually take root. Crypto has this intellectual elite. You have to recognize it. You have to pay and give your due respects to the intellectual elite of crypto. Oftentimes these ideas, they take root with that group, and it's somewhat of like a hierarchy. And if those folks give their blessing on your position, then you can sort of go to the masses and like leverage social proof for your strategic position. So whatever the answer to your positioning is, you can't really like stretch the truth here. The more intellectually honest and authentic it is, the better. So where do you actually start in answering those 4 questions? The first thing that comes to mind for me is differentiation. We as human beings are hardwired to notice what's different. Someone wears a unique piece of jewelry, someone dresses differently, someone speaks in a certain style, maybe a brand issues certain memes that others don't. But we as human beings are hardwired to notice what's different. You will be handsomely rewarded for being different when it comes to your brand positioning. It's just the way as human beings act and operate. Another way to think about positioning is that it's truly a battlefield, and it's a battle of ideas, and it's ultimately a battle of mindshare. And the more your brand grows, the more influence it has. Think about the sheer influence that Ethereum has. Think about the growing influence that Solana is having right now. And it's important to define the battlefield. Who do you want to be compared and contrasted with? Who's your direct competition? Who's your indirect competition? You don't have to leave this up to choice. Like, you don't have to leave it up to the market. You can actually define it for the market itself. And you can create the lens of interpretation for the market and define the battle ultimately. So there's this larger question as you craft your position around your appetite for competition. And a few years back, I saw this tweet by David Sachs, ex-PayPal guy. I think he sold Yammer to Microsoft for north of $1 billion. And he put up this tweet, and when I saw it, I was like, you know what, this is like really illuminary of just how us marketers think about categorical plays. He said, 2 formulas for mega success. One is the Michael Jordan way. Strive to be the best. Compete and win. Double down in the face of fierce competition. Number 2 is the Peter Thiel way. Seek to avoid competition. Find a compounding advantage. Pivot if competition is too fierce. Being in the middle, not so good. The vast majority of brands that I see straddle the middle, and they don't really pick a side. They don't really pick a strategic direction to go into. The truth is that both directions work. And there's plenty of examples of brands on both sides that have been successful on both paths. But you need to size up your space and like really ask yourself, like, do I really want to play this competitive game? Do I really want to jump into this category and like really play with those rules? I don't necessarily have to. I can go create my own category. I can redefine the category. I can create a subcategory. There's a variety of different paths, but ultimately there is this sort of question around your appetite for competition. But here's the thing. There's a graveyard of companies that have tried the Thiel way. It sounds sexy, but they're unable to do it. Why? Because when you introduce something new, the market fundamentally doesn't understand it. And so if you take the Thiel path, you carry the burden of education. And you, as a category creator, need to educate, evangelize the new category. The benefit of jumping into an existing category and playing in those rules is that someone else has already done the learning or the education and cut the learning curve for the market. You just have to figure out your onlyness in that category and your differentiated role and relevance in that. And if there's one thing you take away from that slide, is that you shouldn't fall into what's known as the everything trap. Don't be all things to all people. And I think who you say no to and make a conscious choice of like, all right, we are deliberately and intentionally going to ignore this audience in order to create a deeper yes towards this specific audience, to me is the way to go. You do not want to be all things to all people, because that means you're really nothing to no one. So if you find yourself taking a highly competitive Michael Jordan route. What you need to do is you need to figure out how to rearrange the competitive ladder. So for example, Solana takes a look at the layer 1 category and they're like, yeah, like we believe in this category. However, we have a very strong point of view as to what matters in this category. And to us, our point of view is that speed is what matters and speed kills. So the entire job of Solana marketing is to convince the market that they should arrange the competitors in the layer 1 category in accordance to speed. And if they are successful, they're able to transcend the competitive ladder and be the top choice according to that parameter. So you can choose an x-axis to rank the market on. You can choose a y-axis, even a z-axis if you want. And you can create this sort of like competitive ladder and you can transcend it should you go the Jordan route. However, beware, because the moment you do something like that, the market will follow. And you're going to see a lot of Me Too's. And so it's a competitive, sharp elbow, brute force environment, and be prepared. Doable, but it just comes with a certain territory. And if you were to go the teal route and evade competition, you can draw a polarizing line between an entire category itself. And you can say, hey, there's that old status quo category, and then there's this new category. And you can just rank, it doesn't even matter what the ranking is actually, right? In the old category, the entire category is the bad choice. The right choice is this new category, but it's also a dangerous path because you are in territory where it's only you. The market is highly suspicious of a category of one. I would argue that there's no such thing as a category of one. If there are multiple players in your category and you invite folks to your category, the category takes life. So how you define the battle is an important part in the art of strategic positioning. Now, what I shared with you is like a gross oversimplification of like a higher level thing around like competitive appetite. But like I said, there's just branches of like strategies on both sides here in terms of having zero to many competition. And I do think of it as a fork in the road. One big takeaway though is that if you don't have a point of view, you have no brand. That's always like something that gets me about brands. Like they just come at it with like a weak point of view. Their product doesn't really have a provocative idea. There's this famous saying that I love to repeat: love me or hate me, but whatever you do, please don't like me. And I'm into controversy. I think it spreads. I like that there's haters because for every hater, there's a lover. And you want to come at the market. You want to establish this point of view for the brand that you assert. Because what that does is that it finally like creates this dynamic in the market as to where and how the market should interpret all the players. No point of view, you have no brand. Now, how do you go about actually finding that difference? As I mentioned, we're handsomely rewarded for being different. One way that Andy and I would discuss often is that you can ultimately characterize your brand difference in one of three macro distinctions. One is a product-centric differentiation. She would call these mechanics. The other is concept. She'd call these missionaries. And then the third are users. And she'd call these mothers. Mechanics, missionaries, and mothers. Now, if you were to choose let's just say, the product-centric route, there's two options for you. You can differentiate on features or value. I always hate like differentiating on a feature. Why? Because features are copied, and then your moat is really thin. Value. So, for example, Solana, it's the fastest. Now they back it up with like really left brain arguments, numbers, and they substantiate it. And it's got to be rooted in real intellectual ground. If you choose the concept-centric route, there's also two paths. One is just a sheer cult of personality. And in crypto, that's another big difference outside of community. This space is like really driven by powerful personalities. And you could think of like Amin at Avalanche, you can think of Do Kwon, you can think of, Vitalik, and you can think of Anatoly, and like just the way that these personalities just drive so much of the brand. Huge in crypto branding. And then the next thing is like the next big thing. That the old is that status quo category, and the next big thing is this new thing. That's the concept-centric path. And then lastly, there's users, or the user-centric, and you can choose a segment that you over service, or you can differentiate on experience. Product-centric, concept-centric, user-centric. I found this to be really helpful in architecting a strategic position and differentiation path. So as you figure that out, and if you land on the caricature of a position, and it's probably got to be distilled into 3 to 5 words, extremely precise. The next question to ask is, does my brand positioning actually have a moat? If it's easy to copy, it's a bad position. You want others to lose authenticity if they were trying to duplicate your position. And I think one of the things that is like a mark of success is when you see a lot of Me Too's after you position. Like if you position, and people ask me all the time, it's like, how do I know if my positioning is actually working? I think the first thing that comes to mind is like, is the market actually responding? Is there an actual dialogue between the brand and you and the market? And then on the other side is, are there a lot of Me Too's who are copying you? Does my brand have a moat? There are 7 famed moats that you should think about. One is scale economies. The second is network effects. The third is counter positioning. So you can take a juggernaut in the category and you can diametrically position. 4 is switching costs. 5 is the brand itself, especially important in a commoditized space. 6 is a cornered resource. Maybe there's something that you have unique or asymmetric access to that others don't. And the 7th is process power. There's something that you do very efficiently that other brands aren't able to do. There's another line in positioning strategy that I've thought about over the years, which is that you can be deceptively small intentionally when it comes to your strategic position. You don't necessarily have to reveal the entire iceberg. You can show something much more focused. So I'll give you an example, a Web2 example. Early on, Amazon positioned as the leading online retailer for books, even though Jeff Bezos knew that he would eventually go out and build the everything store. But why did he just position as an online book retailer? He was being deceptively small. Facebook.edu, they gated it. You had to be a college student in the early days. You had to go to Harvard, you had to go to MIT, you had to go to Stanford, Cal to even get on. And now if you look at it, Facebook, it has like senior citizens mostly on it. Who uses Facebook outside of that group now? And I think in crypto, this act is also there. You can kind of create this near early tribalism, and you can sort of like hitch onto a certain tribe and then do what I call a bundle and break away and actually like segue this departure after you go. And so I think one of the things here is just is phase positioning. Like in the first 18 months, 3 years, 5 years, like how does the positioning actually evolve? Because you don't necessarily have to give the entire iceberg right away. So positioning is about sacrifice. The narrower the position, the stronger the brand. You do not want to be all things to all people. Who will you prioritize in the near term? What are you willing to sacrifice from your optics in order to create more amplification, more magnification? And what's the first visual that you really want folks to see? And then you have to subtract it. Positioning is a very creative art. It's no different than how an artist actually creates a painting. You get to choose what someone sees when it comes to the portrait of your brand. Take a look at these statements. Salesforce, they came out with this thing called no software. Amazon had this one-liner called one click. Solana has only possible on Solana. And I also see ZK is the end game from Matter Labs and all those guys, great guys. The thing about this is that these aren't positioning statements, they're taglines. And a big takeaway is that your tagline is not a positioning statement. A positioning statement is a matter of fact, no bullshit, non-hyperbolic articulation of who you are and why you matter. A tagline is much more of an emotionally driven one-liner that that just gets the people going. And so I see a lot of folks get this confused, like a tagline versus a positioning statement. And you want to make sure that you actually have a rooted, matter-of-fact, factual, logical, just the facts positioning statement. Now, not to say that you can that you shouldn't have a tagline. You should, but your tagline is more of a manifestation of your strategic position. And taglines, I also call them zingers. And the reason why I call them zingers is because not only can you form taglines around your own brand, but going back to the whole battlefield thing, you can overlay stuff around your competitors, around competitive categories. And like that term zinger comes from politics. And some of the best like communicators I've ever met all like have chapters in politics for whatever reason. But one of the things I picked up there is just like with candidates, you can overlay a bias against your competition. So why does Donald Trump call Hillary Crooked Hillary? Why did he call Jeb Bush low energy Jeb or Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas? What he's doing is that he's leveraging confirmation bias. And he's anchoring his audience onto a specific word or phrase that engineers a bias against the competition. You can do the same thing when it comes to crypto. You can take a competitor and completely engineer this bias against them. You can do it directly. You can do it indirectly. You can organize influencers to overlay that positioning. And think about it when it comes to competitive positioning as to what you are going to engineer over yourself and then ultimately architect over others that are competing for mindshare. And another way that I like to think about this whole thing is that your positioning is ultimately a mind virus. You're engineering this mind virus and you're loading up a set of words and phrases that are just loaded with narrative. And if you are successful, that mind virus transfers from one person to another person, from one tribe to another tribe, from an entire community to another community. And if your position does not earn attention, it's a bad position. It needs to earn attention on its own. Paying for marketing, frankly, is cringe. It's not something that I like to do. But crafting an authentic and left brain position that is rooted in true substantive ground that spreads organically on its own is good marketing. And that's why you could think about it in terms of engineering this virus, going into earned media, and then only using paid media if you have to. And in such a tribalistic world, this is the only way to really conduct effective marketing, in my opinion. And I think my big takeaway for you is that positioning is the epicenter of marketing. If you're going to start anywhere, start with your positioning. Nail that, figure that out, pin it down, and then go into activation. So I'll leave you with some questions to consider as you think about your positioning. One, what must be true about my position? What does success really look like here? What's the mind share that we're ultimately going to chisel and architect? Second, what industry trend or force can I leverage for relevance? And that term relevance is really important. Oftentimes, like, I'll interview customers, users of brands, and like I'll discover that this differentiation that the brand is actually like jumping up and down about, the market or the user base just doesn't even care about it. And so, like, how is your differentiation even relevant is like a big question. It's that marriage of differentiation and relevance. In this life, you can be famous, but irrelevant at the same time. I used to be the head of PR at this globally traded cybersecurity company. They invented the firewall, and they were famous, but they were irrelevant. And so you can lose relevance real quickly, even though you're famous. So what's the industry trend or force that I can leverage to find intense relevance and be in word of mouth? Third, target audience. Who am I speaking to? But more importantly, I think the inverse of that question is important, which is, who am I not speaking to? What's the sandbox that I want to play in? Ultimately, the category that I'm going to architect here or slide into. Number 5, who should I directly be compared and contrasted with? Let me choose my direct competitor for the market. Let me not leave that up to chance. And then number 6, what culture do I establish to reinforce my strategic positioning? Culture eats strategy. You can craft an elegant strategy, but if the culture of the organization isn't set up to support that strategic position, you're going nowhere. Culture eats strategy. So what we just covered so far was the positioning side, the sort of left brain, logical part of brand positioning. Now I want to switch gears and move towards the right side in the time that I have remaining. A few years back, I was just like, where does the term brand like actually come from? Like, what's the etymology of brand? So it actually stems from ranchers and livestock and cattle. What they would do is they would burn a brand, a symbol, onto livestock to tell them apart. And it's kind of like the same thing. It's like you want to achieve that sort of like this, like you want to burn this like distinction onto your brand and really like let it take root. But what you signal to the market isn't actually the brand. It's the response. So going back to Jeff Bezos, I think he has a famous line where it's like, you know, your brand is what people say when you're not in the room. Same thing here. If I interview, you know, folks in your community and ask them like, hey, what do you really think about this? Like, how would you describe them? What's the pain or problem that they solve? What's the value proposition? What's the first thing that comes to mind when I say this brand? Whatever they say is the brand, whether we like it or not, the good, the bad, and the ugly. A brand is a prize. It's a response. You earn the brand. You send a signal. You stimulate the market. Some of your stuff lands, some of it doesn't. But like whatever lands or doesn't land ultimately chisels this perception. And that is the brand. So a brand is a response, not a stimuli. Earlier this year, I began thinking about the difference between branding in Web 2 versus Web 3. And it's simply not the same. A lot of the Web 2 playbooks just don't neatly carry over to Web 3. I would argue that crypto brand positioning and marketing is the bleeding edge of just marketing as a discipline in of itself. It's uncharted territory. We are all figuring it out as to how it goes. But what I've been able to tease out, and I'll probably write a blog post about this soon, is that there's these certain parameters of building a brand in crypto. There's almost like this political view. Bitcoin, conservative. Ethereum, idealistic. Solana, progressive. For Cosmos, I put radical. There's a tribal trait. Ethereum is kind of utopian. Resilient Bitcoin. Solana has this practical, pragmatic vibe. There's a core value. Cosmos is sovereignty. There's an emotional center. autonomy versus Solana's thrill. Cosmos, I put ingenuity. And then there's this destination, this sort of North Star that these brands put forth. And then for the masses, they analogize. And then going beyond that sort of intellectual elite of crypto, like some folks just don't get it, and they'll only get it through analogy. So this is some of the interesting things that I've seen when it comes to crypto branding. And I think just like an important thing here is that like it's much different than Web 2. So how do you build what's known as a branded house? A branded house is much different than a house of brands. A house of brands is kind of like Procter & Gamble. A branded house is sort of like Google in the early days. Like there's Google Maps, there's Google Drive, and you build all this brand equity around a singular brand and then you extend it. Whereas a house of brands, the parent brand isn't really well known. And then the players or the children in the house, that's where all the mindshare and brand equity is. You choose a brand archetype. This is the vibe. From there, you choose a core belief. It's got to be authentic. You choose a brand driver. It's a singular emotion. And this is the emotional center. You pick a brand attribute, words or phrases that should be synonymized with the brand, and then a brand personality. These are the human characteristics. And then you go out and you build all the assets that are expressions of the brand. But I see a lot of brands just jump straight to the website, or they'll just like make their logo without really thinking strategically about what actually makes up a branded house. One thing that I want to take a deep dive on are brand archetypes. And this is inspired by Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist. And ultimately, there's these 12 iconic archetypes that are already ingrained in our psyches. One is the ruler brand. A second is the creator archetype. Then there's the hero, think Nike. Everyman, think Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. John McCain was known as the Maverick in the Senate. A sage brand is kind of like Bill Nye and the Science Guy. Now, speaking of Bill Nye and the Science Guy, he's also a jester brand, sage and jester. And so you can also mix these archetypes into creative outcomes. So with Ethereum, to me, they are more everyman and slightly magician. You can see through their illustration, there's a lot of folks here. They're all kind of having a good time. Feels like, anyone can belong here. And they give me an everyman vibe. Solana is much more into power, the fast, the speed. One can argue that they are also magician, but maybe a mix of ruler. And so what I wanted to do is just map out some of the brands in crypto to overlay over this framework. And so for Sage, I put Flashbots and Scroll. For Explorer, I put Arbitrum. To me, the entire Cosmos community is kind of outlaw. I put Osmosis. Solana, the magician. Lido, I put as hero. Barachain, Smoking, those guys are also cool. And I think they're really leading crypto in terms of the most crypto native, brand marketing. To me, they've nailed the jester archetype. Monad is like a quick follower there. Ethereum, everyman. Gitcoin, caregiver. Avalanche is ruler. Fuel. And then Espresso, just the name in of itself. It's kind of innocuous. To me, it's an innocent brand. And then as you round this out, there's these emotional triggers that you should think about. Power, lust, mystique, alarm, prestige, rebellion, and trust. Which of these emotions are you going to go full throttle on? Which one of these are you going to just ignore and not pull the trigger on? So if you go to Polychain's website, for example, it's just a bunch of text. There's literally nothing else. They're going hard on the mystique trigger. Kind of like if you know, you know. Elon Musk at Tesla and SpaceX has this entire alarm trigger strategy. Tesla's mission statement is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. He's on podcasts with Joe Rogan that say Occupy Mars. He's basically architecting this narrative where it's like, hey, if we do not do something as a human species to get to a multi-planet species, and if we don't go to Mars, we are screwed. That's the narrative. Maybe you're a prestige brand. You're not for everyone. Maybe you're rebellion. kind of like Cosmos. Or maybe you pull the power trigger hard, kind of like Solana. So as you think about the branding side, and this is where we'll conclude, here's another set of questions that I think you should ask yourself. What is the deeper why underneath my brand? People don't buy what I do. People don't buy how I do it, but they buy into the why. What's the deeper why? If my brand were a person, what personality characteristics would it have? What is the core attribute should I synonymize the brand with? What should the emotional center of the brand be? So for example, Red Bull, their brand driver, their emotional center is extreme. But they don't actually explicitly say it, but all their marketing communicates or conveys that emotion. They're hosting the X Games, they're jumping off something near the moon, and they're like, taking this thing, they're like paragliding and parachuting, they're doing all sorts of extreme things. So they're like saying it without actually explicitly saying it. Same thing. What is my brand actually communicating emotionally? What is it emoting? But I don't actually explicitly say it. And then lastly, what is the visual signature that I should establish around all the right brain collateral and design assets? That if there was no logo, if there was no name brand, and all they can see is just like design, would they be able to recognize me through a visual signature? Could be an emoji, it could be a gradient. So for example, Solana brands its gradient and they extend it into physical spaces. Is it like Celestia's stream visual? Like what exactly is that visual cue, that visual signature that I stretch from one place all the way to the four corners of crypto? So there you have it. That's how I think about brand positioning. And I guess we can open it up for Q&A.
All right. Yo, that was an amazing seminar. I learned a lot. A lot of people got into the chat. They're learning a lot. I think this is one of the best workshops I've seen so far. So before we get into Q&A, I just want to give you a shout out, Ekram. That was really informational and amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Yeah, thanks for teaming me up with this. And I really enjoyed it.
Amazing. So we do have a question from the audience. One of them is, what is the hardest branding and positioning issues regarding the modular narrative?
Yeah. The modular narrative is only as good as its inclusiveness. And it's important for other projects to identify as modular. It goes back to sort of my thing of what I said about like there's no such thing as a category of one. And so making sure that other folks feel comfortable, other projects identify as modular, and making sure that the modular community has all the resources to go modular and to build modular and to thrive in the modular world is really the challenge as to where we are now. And I think the Modular Summit later this year is really important to really figure that out. And again, like this has to be rooted in real intellectual ground. Like it's not really marketing. And so really figuring that out, I think, is the challenge. And I think the other sort of thing with like, the modular narrative is, the modular versus monolithic conversation and where that stands, and making sure that has the right substance is another challenge when it comes to the modular narrative.
Great stuff. There you guys have it. Here's a question I think you're going to like, Ekram. Who was behind the build whatever tagline?
Yeah, that credit to the team on that one. We were at, a lot of folks have asked us if we hired an agency or something like that. And the truth is, no, we did not. That was actually just cooked up over an onsite with the Celestia team. And it truly just comes from like us over dinner and talking about it. And so I got to give a shout out to the team itself, and that's where it actually originated from, over an on-site.
Right. Yeah. It was at the on-site. There was a lot of brainstorming out in the courtyard, and then when we heard build whatever is one of the ideas, we all locked in. Everyone's like, build whatever, love it. It was risky at the time, but we're like, we gotta test it out, and the market, I guess, responded really well, and they love it.
Yeah, to add on to that, so it was actually build anything in the beginning, and so we took it out into the courtyard, and Yaz completely shat on it. He was like, "This is never gonna effing work," and he was like, "This is terrible." Like, and Renee gave her two pieces, and Hlib and like all of them, they weren't vibing with it, and then build whatever came out, and like the entire energy changed, and that's when I knew it was authentic. And like for me, whenever I really like excavate something truly authentic, I get out of its way and I put as much like spotlight as I can on it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It was authentic because like how it resonated with the Celestia engineers, with us. It was truly how I guess the word I'm looking for. It kind of aligned with our culture, right, at Celestia Labs, in a way, and that's what made it genuine, right?
Yeah, and that goes back to the other point of culture eats strategy. And so you need to find positioning and messaging and architect a brand that like is in line with the culture. And sometimes that takes time. It doesn't come out right away. And so like really immersing yourself and connecting with the people of the org is one of the chief responsibilities of a marketing person.
Amazing. One question. What is Ekram cooking for Celestia now? What are you cooking?
What am I cooking? Build whatever with Celestia underneath. That's what we're focused on.
There you have it. Build whatever with Celestia underneath. Oh, sorry, I got my calendar notification. Any more question by the audience? I have a few questions I can ask while we wait for the audience to ask any questions. So, Ekram, one of the things you mentioned in your talk is that when you're marketing your project, you got to get rid of marketing fluff. So, what are common examples you see of marketing fluff that could be easily eliminated by folks who are marketing their project?
Anytime I see superfluous language, like that really exaggerates things, to me, it's like marketing fluff. Like the word seamless, or the word empowers, for example, or just really exaggerated language is like sort of the stuff that to me is like another red flag. The other thing too is that sometimes words they lose their meaning, and like that's a challenge for like us marketers, and like we have to kind of root it into intellectual ground. I could name some names like where, but I won't call them out, but like there's a lot of brands where they're just pushing something out that's marketing fluff, and it'll never really have that left brain side, and it just ignores the left brain, and I know immediately that it's never going to spread, because you can't really spread something that doesn't hook both parts of the brain.
Yeah, one that I always think about that I'm not sure if you think is true is marketing fluff, but I hate it whenever somebody uses in the common English language when they're talking about their project, it utilizes. It utilizes. I've never heard anyone talk about, oh, I'm utilizing. People say I'm using, I'm a user, I'm not a utilizer, right? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, utilizing?
We should ban that word. Yes, I actually have a question for you. Which projects like and outside of Celestia do you think do the best marketing?
That's a great question. I really, really like the Barra chain marketing. and brand identity. Yeah, and one of the people commented as well. I don't know, they have this imagery and like design and illustration that kind of show you like, yeah, we're an alternative L1 in the EVM world, but we have this identity that is so unique around bears, and even their application, they're all bear themed and stuff. So I really like their marketing. I think like a lot of people just want to use Chain because their marketing is really successful.
Yeah. I've been liking Monad stuff a lot lately too.
Yeah. I haven't really explored Monad, but I would definitely explore it and see their marketing. We do have a question by the audience. What are 3 words that define the infinite space bazaar, according to you?
And assuming I can't use the word infinite space bazaar, I think of collaboration, positive sum, experimentation.
I love that word the most, experimentation, because I mean that's what it's all about, like the spirit of experimenting together and like building and iterating. So I love that. Let's wait if there's any more questions, but until there's a question by the audience. How would marketing translate long-term user retention?
Ultimately, it's the connection that users have with the brand that drives that retention. Once someone gets emotionally attached, they will ignore blunders, hacks, f-ups, screw-ups, but you have to earn that loyalty. And so ultimately it's the brand and the connection that the tribe or the audience actually has with it. And it just takes time to build, and it's not something that you can like fabricate, and it has to be really authentic. But ultimately it's the brand itself.
There you have it. It's the brand. So, one other question. You mentioned before being provocative. Do you see many brands making the mistake of not being provocative and that impacting them?
Yeah, I would say 98% of all brands I see are not provocative enough. I would say 99% of founders I see aren't provocative enough.
Ooh, that's a big number. Interesting. Yeah, I definitely see that. A lot of times, like I don't do a good job of following up on everything happening in Web3. I mean, even though I've been in space for so long, but a lot of times nothing captured my attention if it's not provocative enough when I see it on Twitter or hear about it from a friend. A lot of it is just plain vanilla, right? And just like vanilla kind of statements, so which kind of makes it hard. Like if I don't know about your project, it's probably because you've not been provocative enough that got me a little like, smirk and be like, oh, let me find out what they're up to. What are they actually cooking?
Yeah.
Let's see. Any question by the audience? Okay, so here's one for you. Which of the emotional triggers, you mentioned, I think 7, right? Which of the emotional triggers is the most effective, in your opinion?
They are all equally effective. You can't put one over the other. I would say the combination of them becomes really powerful. That's probably one thing to say. But you can go up and down that whole list and place brands that have successfully pulled each one, and they're at the top of their category.
Good to know. I like the whole, what was it? Was it like alarm or like anger or like, I mean, fear. Like
Alarm.
alarm is another word of fear, right? And fear can drive a lot of people to like a trigger that gets them to like a call to action, right? So I don't know. I really resonate a lot with alarm because I'm like, if we don't do this, like the whole world is gonna go to shit, right? Um,
Yeah. You know, there's been studies of just like what actually drives the behavior of human beings, and results consistently show that it's fear. And so when a brand can achieve the emotion of fear, it's a very powerful narrative.
oof. I hope people are taking notes.
Yeah, if there's anything I can leave, one of the things, if I want to leave to a big takeaway here, is that, you know, crypto marketing and brand positioning is, to me, like like the bleeding edge of marketing. There isn't really like a blueprint or like an established playbook in this space. It's still being hashed out and formed as we, you know, speak. And so, you know, we should continue the dialogue, and you guys can find me on Twitter, etc. And I'm like actively trying to like unravel the secrets here, because just, you know, I spent an early part of my career in Web 2, and that was one of the first things that I noticed. It's like you can't really run Web 2 marketing playbooks in crypto.
Amazing. Well, I think now we're at time. I want to give a shout out to you, Ekram, for spending. I know you have a really busy schedule. You spend time with us and the hackers to show them how to market and position and brand their project. I think a lot of people took a lot of free alpha from here, and I'm sure the workshop going to be studied in Harvard Business Law School in the future. One of the case studies for how Web3 kind of achieved its dominance through people like you. So shout out to Ekram. Do you have any parting words for people?
No, find me on Twitter. Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Amazing. Thank you all and have a good day. Bye.